Hello and welcome from me, Mike Scott in Oxford in the UK, and from Catherine Temple and Joe Simmons in Washington, DC. This is the ninth event in this new series, which is following on from the Christian Literary Imagination series and our earlier series, Christian Shakespeare ? Which is now available as a book published by Vernon Press. All three series are part of Georgetown University's Humanities Initiative in association with Campion Hall, Oxford, and the Las Casas Institute for Social Justice, Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce today's speaker, Graham Oppenheimer. Your participation is as important as ever. So please type in any questions you have by using the Q&A key at the bottom of your screen from the moment that we start. We will endeavour to put those questions to Graham towards the end of the programme and have a discussion also with Catherine and with Joe. So ensure you please use the Q&A button, not the chat button. Thanks very much. Graham Oppenheimer is a great friend of mine, and he is one of the UK's foremost and most respected violists. He studied with Attar Arad at the Royal Northern College of Music, Manchester, and Eastman School of Music in the USA, and with Alberto Lisi at the International Menuhin Music Academy, Gstaad. Joining the English Chamber Orchestra while still a student, he was later a founder member and principal viola of the Chamber Orchestra of Europe under Claudio Abbado. Graham has appeared as guest violist with leading quartets, including the Vermeer, Lindsay, Pacifica, Volga, Vanberg, Carducci, Saint Laurent, and the Australian, and with piano trios, including Cropper, Welsh, Roscoe, Bush, and Holger Lager. He has appeared in chamber music collaborations with Yehudi Menuhin, Paul Tatelier, Murray Pariah, Imogen Cooper, Lars Anders Tomter, Martin Roscoe, and James Galway. And he was founder of the Shidloff Quartet, who appeared worldwide, including, I can say, at Georgetown University in the 1990s, and recording several CDs for Lynn Records. Oppenheimer is senior chamber music tutor at Chatham School of Music, a prestigious school in Manchester, and gives master classes internationally. He is also broadcast on radio throughout the world, from the BBC in the UK to the ABC in Australia. It's a real honour to have him talking to us today about music and the environment and about his instruments. Let me say one more thing. Whilst he was with the Shidloff Quartet, that quartet was loaned a Stradivarius quartet of instruments. It was magic. That's what happened at Georgetown University and De Montfort University in the UK. So thanks, Graham, for being with us. I'm going to hand over to you now. It's all yours.
Thank you for all that, Mike. Much appreciated. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. Yeah, so I am a classical musician, viola player, educator. I suppose above all, what I bring to all of those things is that I am a performer. I'm using elements of that with whatever I do. So really, I see myself as a communicator, a linguist, using linguistics of grammar, syntax, phonetics in the same way as language. But my concepts are emotions in sound. Music is a language. Some speak it. Others speak and understand, others only understand. But I think that everybody gets something out of classical music, and it's with us all the time, wherever we go. Probably in some ways more than we think in many different areas of life. my classical music is, of course, very wide. My world is chamber music. Very direct, very personal, so very different from orchestra or large opera productions. I'm constantly recreating the art of great composers, interpreting their music, their ideas. It kind of really does feel like a privilege being able to do that. During the talk today, I'm going to play some different music. I'm going to play to you directly myself, and I'm going to play a variety of things also online. But without further ado, really, I always feel that in music, when music's involved, the best thing to do is to experience the music. So I'm going to set my art myself in context. I'm going to play you some music now, and I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to play you some music of Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, a solo suite, the prelude from his suite in G major. I'll come back and join you. So, the music of Bach, very expressive beauty. The meaning, though, if there is any meaning there, to an extent all comes from the harmony. That's kind of what's dictating my own interpretation of that. So as I say, this piece is in G major. I am G major. That's what Bach is saying. That very open beginning. The very next suite, the prelude of that, is in D minor. So here Bach saying, I am in D minor, very different, sort of dark, distant key. So a very different kind of music. So it's a kind of opposite emotion from, let's say, a introverted Beethoven quartet, where Beethoven might be reacting musically to his own frustrations or life events. This music, for me, is the Bach is very clean, very clear, very simple, very life-affirming in its own way. A work of art. I just want to show you the manuscript of this very piece. So this in itself is a work of art. That line across the top. This could be almost on the wall as a painting. So this is the music that I played. You can see the beginning there. Those sort of sweeping string crossings. But you see the kind of wonderful, elegant lines of this music on the written page. I think we tend to forget the printed music that we get nowadays, which I'm sure people are familiar with, comes in sort of straight lines and it's all very neat. There's something rather nice, as I say, like a work of art, being able to see how the composer originally wrote. Some are amazing. They really do look like works of art. Others, particularly Mozart, was perhaps known for this, tended to be a lot of crossings out, not necessarily the neatest. So it did vary a lot, just like somebody's handwriting, really. The Bach I played, just to remind you, the piece basically, like a great work of art, like a painting or like a building, comes at us. He finishes where he starts. This was the beginning. And this is the end. So it's the same kind of thing. He sort of turned it around and developed it a little bit. But if you imagine the front of a great, I don't know, a church or a cathedral, you'd have this arch, very much the same kind of thing. All great masterpieces will be highly organized in music with that kind of architecture. That's where they're so pleasing for us to listen to. So talking of works of art, it's kind of rather nice as a string player, particularly, that we, as our tools of trade, have these amazing works of art that we play on. I'm very fortunate with this one. I'm going to do it a hammer because it is a working item as well as a work of art. But they are, of course, lovely objects. I'm very fortunate to have this one. It's from southern Germany. It was made somewhere around 1760, between 1760 and 1770. So I like to think, being from southern Germany, that this would have taken part in a performance that Mozart might have been conducting, an orchestra or something like that, let's say. But as you can see, it's got a variety of colors, dark and light, which goes with the kind of shades of the sound that it can give. Originally, of course, any instrument like this, the only part that would be original would be the body of the instrument. All these strings and these black bits would have gone, even the fingerboard here, and the scroll, because it would have had a new neck. In a sense, string instruments are kind of simple. They're not too complicated. I'll tell you what's more complicated are bows. Obviously, a ton of wood in that, wood from Central European forests. Bows are actually far more complicated. By the way, the one I was using for the Bach, this one, you might be able to see the difference in the tip there. It's a lighter bow, it's a Baroque bow. and it's got a different kind of frog. And can you see it bows the other way? It goes that way. Modern bows go that way because they are stronger. So Central European wood for my instrument. This is Pernambuco from Brazil. There's now work to try and protect that wood. Obviously, it's part of a trade for a bow maker and for a musician like me. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into these bows. Lots of incredible workmanship, bringing me back to the concept of the work of art. There's mother of pearl in there. There's a silver ferrule to keep it, the hair in there. There's silver, there's leather, and there is at the end, I'm sure some of you are aware of controversy surrounding elephant ivory. So it was elephant ivory for many years, but now bow makers use mammoth tusk, which is emerging, of course, from the permafrost in Northern Europe, and it's not an endangered species. So my kit, the works of art of my kit inspire me as well. And certainly this is my good friend. Doesn't have a name though. Very important, living works of art, really. In theory, any string instrument is enhancing the link between the natural world. It's from the natural world, really. There are, with the natural world, non-traditional ways, non-traditional branches of music education, which also develops that link, some of which are kind of non-traditional as well. I'm kind of really keen on those kind of concepts linking to the natural world. I'm going to show you a video of a project that I organized. It was a music performance in the National Forest, which is right in the middle of England. And we worked with different groups of children. And they are essentially, as you will see, playing the forest, using kind of different methods, including a poem about trees. It was implemented through an education organization that I've started, which creates education opportunities in schools for young people, and at the same time provides a training in presenting education work for young professional string quartets in this country, in the UK. In this video, you can see both elements. So this is Symphony for String Quartet, just the closing section for string quartet and school children. Let's see what you think of this. so yeah, so we had an amazing experience, a day in the forest with, you know, the natural environment, playing the natural world. All great composers, I think, have found some kind of inspiration from nature and from the natural world. They've expressed this in different ways in their music. For some composers, this has kind of become a clear expression of their national geography or their surroundings, and a direct connection with nature and the world. Obviously, this series of talks is linking Oxford with Georgetown. So to illustrate this kind of link that composers have directly with the natural world, I've picked two works, one British and one American, to share with you. The first is Sir Edward Elgar, his string quartet written in 1918, a movement that is a kind of opposite response to the horrors of the First World War, exactly from when he wrote it. And in this section, he creates a kind of musical, captures musical English sunshine, I feel. I can almost experience fields, hedges, trees, sheep. The musical score is going to follow this as well, so you'll be able to see that as we go. So this is Elgar String Quartet, second movement. So I don't know if you agree with me, but somehow very English, that Sir Edward Elgar String Quartet. So to try and enhance my point further, our American music, Aaron Copland, one of America's greatest composers, and actually referred to by his peers and music critics as the Dean of American composers. Here is, I'm going to play you a section of his Appalachian Spring from 1944. It was originally described as a ballet on an American theme, a journey to meet springtime. You might, while you're listening, also like to consider what time of day this could be set in, perhaps not just one time of day. So there we are, well and truly up and running with the Aaron Copland. Somehow very American, I feel. How do composers get their music to sound geographically identifiable in this way? Well, it's a complicated debate. Musicologists discuss it, and obviously that's a discussion for another time. I can only speak about the feelings and the images that these types of works invoke in me when I'm playing them and what I'm wanting to create. It's certainly one of the elements that makes performing so rewarding, so varied and fascinating as well. Those are kind of very pleasurable, enjoyable pieces. Of course, as we know, the world is not all beautiful, and to sort of quote from the title of the talks, it's also bent. This equally applies to music. This can include reflecting the human-made environment, cities, machines, and some composers, of course, link this with modern art movements of their time. I'm going to play you a piece of music by the German composer Paul Hindemith, who was seen as the contemporary composer of his day, particularly in the period between the two wars. Hindemith was also a kind of avid artist himself. He liked to draw a lot, some grotesque images, would often include machines in those as well. He played my instrument, the viola. So I'm going to play you a movement from his solo sonata from 1923. It feels to me very mechanical, machine-like, altogether a different kind of expression from the Elgar or the Copland. Very interesting, challenging. He writes above the music the unusual indication: furious tempo, wild, tone quality is irrelevant. that somehow came down the line okay. It's quite exciting to play, as well as perhaps to listen to as well. When it was first performed in America, that in the 20s, there was reportedly a benefactor of the arts present in the audience, who was slightly hard of hearing and had an ear trumpet. And when Hindemith started playing, she removed her trumpet and looked down it and shook it, put it back in, and nothing had changed. So she just put the trumpet aside, carried on listening like that. But Hindemith was certainly a leading figure and a strong force who took 20th century music forward a long way. Before we stop, I just want to play you one final piece. One of the most extraordinary pieces of the 20th century. It's a piece called Black Angels by the American experimentalist composer George Crumb, and it was written in 1970 as a response to the Vietnam War. I think that it takes many things to an extreme, which is why I wanted to play it. Even though it was written in 1970, it's right up there as one of the most avant-garde pieces even today. The section I'm going to play you is the opening section of the work, which is actually entitled Night of Electric Insects, and it depicts attack helicopters. Call a halt there. Extraordinary piece though, and you might have seen from the score that was another handwritten score, another work of art. Thinking back to what I said at the beginning about the Bach and showing you the Bach, George Crumb handwrote that score, and it's another one. You could put that on your wall the way he's written it. He came up with different kinds of notation. Anyway, I hope I've given you something to think about next time you go and listen to classical music, go to a concert, or find a connection between a piece of music and your own lives. My next target is to create a chamber music garden for outdoor performances, where I'm working with a leading British designer. So we're going to really bring the natural world right there for concerts. However you continue to experience classical music, I hope you enjoy it, and thank you very much.
Well, I just loved every moment of that. It was just so fascinating, and we really appreciate your sharing it with us. We do have a couple of questions from people in the audience, and I'm going to start with one that intersects with what you've been saying about music and emotion. Okay, so this is from Patricia Marshall, and she says, I found it fascinating that when you were playing Bach, the subtitles, she had turned the subtitles in Zoom on, reacted to the sound as if hearing words. The word which came up regularly was laughter. I therefore wondered if you, when you played the next piece, which was in a minor key, whether the subtitles would reflect that change via the wording in the text, we might see a less happy word. right? And I just, I found that really interesting. And I tried it on another piece in Zoom and it didn't do much, but just say and also. So I wondered if you've ever tried to, well, you do explain this in words in some, you know, in a general sense, but attach words to some of this music, and especially emotive words.
Yes. Before I answer that, I do apologize, Catherine, I've got a technical issue here.
Okay.
I'm still. Sorry about that. I was still getting George Crumb my end and it got rather loud. Sorry.
I think I'd rather get the Bach.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So if sorry, I understood the last part of the question. It's about sort of perhaps, or if I'm over interpreting it, whether I sort of find any imagery with words when I'm playing music. Yeah.
Yes.
Possibly, I would say the only place that words come up for me are if, and in teaching I use this, where I might suggest to students that they might imagine what words could go with a particular piece of music, because many composers, Schubert, Schumann, they wrote Lieder, they wrote songs all the time. And the thing about Lieder, of course, is that it is utterly influenced by the words. Often the poem will come before the that they were actually writing inspired by the poem. So that's certainly a tool that I like to use with students. Personally, I probably go to other things when I'm using kind of imagery. If I'm playing, it's not necessarily words. One of the first pieces of music that I played when I was a student of chamber music was a string quartet by Mozart, which goes like this. It's his very first one. And the teacher years and years ago said, oh, what a lovely hat. And I found that a bit annoying and I couldn't get rid of it. And then actually only a few weeks ago, I asked a group who was playing that very piece what they felt the words could be. And one of them came up with cheese on a silver plate, which I much preferred. So I was very glad that that student had got rid of that, oh, what a lovely hat image I'd had for years. Anyway, that's a kind of connection with words. I hope I've sort of answered that in some way.
That's a wonderful connection. And I love that. I think my own music teacher came up with a few little sentences like that were also equally annoying and not very musical.
Yeah.
I think what you liked about the second one, that the sounds are much more musical than the first one, right?
Yeah. I think just to add, probably the place where use words for imagery is when we're rehearsing. We might be discussing the mood or the nature of passage, and we might be debating it, and we might talk about some of the sounds we're making. This that could have a bit more despair in it, or this could have more hope somehow. So that might be where it might occur more.
Okay. Well, another question is also related to something I was thinking about. Let's see. I think you said something really interesting about music's connection to the natural world. Music as an amplifier, a conduit of what's natural, right? And then one of our participants, Adrian Vagenes, asked, do you think there's a difference between music composed as inspired by nature and that composed in relation to human artifacts and constructs?
Well, human artifacts and constructs. Well, the first composer that comes to mind there is Antonin Dvorak, the Czech composer. His music is incredibly inspired by his own Czech lands. Perhaps some of you will be able to recall the New World Symphony. And he was in love with machines. He wrote 9 symphonies, but he said that he would have gladly given half of his symphonies away for an understanding or having invented the combustion engine, which of course turned up in increasing use around that time. And he traveled widely. So he went to America, probably on a steamship. He loved trains. Trains appear in his music. He kind of creates a folk machine. I think probably in that respect, he might have been a bit in advance of his time, because I think human artifacts and machines and you know, things from the built world, shall we say, might have been used a little bit later on than that. Beethoven was all about emotions. Mozart before him described emotions in a different way. They weren't so much tied up with how he was actually feeling at that time. So I think that kind of connection that you're talking about came along later. And of course, as I've played you, you know, the ultimate is George Crumb, where he was describing his nighttime insects, the helicopters. Yeah, I think that I think the thing the question makes me think is how fantastically varied my world of classical music is. A question that we often get asked by kids if we do education projects is, who is your favorite composer? Well, my favorite composer is the composer I'm playing at the time. I mean, A, I suppose because I'm professional, but B, because, you know, you just get into that world of whatever it is you're playing, and they're all different.
I see that Joe Simmons has joined us. Joe, do you have a comment, question, or?
I do, yes. Thank you, Graham. Sorry I missed you earlier. I very much enjoyed this presentation and thinking about sort of those influences. And you mentioned Dvorak, New World Symphony, where he was trying to weave in African-American spirituals and I think Native American music as well. And it put me in mind of this concept of the edge effect. I don't know if you've ever heard Yo-Yo Ma speaks of the edge effect when you have different either nature and musical instruments or different cultural backgrounds coming together to produce something, that there's a very fruitful effect that happens at the edges of these disciplines or at the edges of these topographies. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I think the New World Symphony is a great example of that sort of fruitfulness that happens at the edges when you're blending of cultures or blending of influences. And it certainly ties into this question that we have about how music and the natural world relates too, I think.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't heard directly of that, what you refer to with Yo-Yo Ma and the edge effect. I'll check that out. Thank you. But I think you're right. And I think Dvorak is a kind of, you know, possibly an earlyish example of that, of the edge effect. And I can think of some bits of chamber music, which he also wrote in America, the American String Quartet and a Quintet, where he's using different elements and some sort of kind of Indian elements at that time that he'd heard, because he would have come across all this music for the first time and been fascinated by it. And he's incorporated that into his music. But what I found fascinating about Dvorak particularly is it seems totally natural. It fits perfectly with his own Czech, you know, homeland and his own background. So it is an edge effect, but somehow he and possibly other people that Yo-Yo Ma might be referring to have woven that in so brilliantly that it becomes very special and very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, and I now see that Michael Scott has joined us. So Michael, would you like to weigh in here?
Yeah, I was wondering about now, really, Graham, what we've been seeing on the news over the past months, and and this week. Firstly, the destruction of the environment by war, and now the destruction of man-made environment by nature itself. And I wondered about that, whether, you know, people like Benjamin Britten, of course, War Requiem and so on. Are you expecting composers now to respond to these incredible disasters that have hit the modern world?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think as you refer to, that has always happened. It's always been, you know, something that can elicit a response. I mean, going back to the earlier stages of the war in Ukraine, in performing, we were perhaps connecting with Ukrainian musicians, not necessarily their response to what was going on, but we were picking up pieces of music that we recognized had been written some time ago that were connected to this, you know, whether it was a setting of some poems from Ukraine by a composer, whether it was Ukrainian folk song that was used in a string quartet or different elements. I think the other thing that I would want to say about that is that when we all started performing again after the pandemic, you do start to question your own art. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And we, I think there's two things about that. I think the first thing is that you were kind of having a, you know, a response to it, kind of silence for, you know, perhaps people who had unfortunately perished as a result. And then recognizing actually the performing art was as important as it has ever been, because it's bringing relief and a bit of escape to people, because, you know, great art takes you out of yourself. So those are my thoughts to that.
Do you think, Graham,
I noticed reading the paper that the Ukrainian ballet has banned Tchaikovsky. They're doing Swan Lake to something else, either somebody else's music completely, or because there was a production going on at the time, or they've had some music commissioned. But I noticed that. Anyway,
no, that raises another kind of issue with Wagner and Germany and so on in the past. I wonder whether there's some kind of catharsis that's present for when you've got this massive problem now in Turkey and Syria and what has happened, almost unimaginable of what's going on. Do you think music there can be useful for people now?
I'm sure it can, and I'm sure some of us remember that there were some bands, people in Ukraine started broadcasting, you know, YouTube performances from Sellers, folk bands and things. That became incredibly important. I can imagine that, you know, for a group of people who've, you know, maybe they're lucky enough to have instruments, but they're outside. I don't know. Who knows? They might be doing things like this. It is the power of music. It does have a power, you know, to heal and to help people.
It's interesting to think about your music in terms of revision. When you were showing us the scores, I was thinking about Julia Lamb's presentation in Oxford, where she talked about revision as a spiritual practice. And I was thinking that when I write, almost every time I look at it, I feel that I want to change something. So I wondered how that maybe plays into your own practice, your own process. Are you tempted to improve Bach?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, the thing about Baroque and classical music is that they can be improvised up. So you do kind of want to do a little bit of improvisation, but you have to do it, you know, you have to be true to the music, and you don't want to start changing scores. But going back earlier than that to when musical notation started, there was probably, musical notation probably was a guidance to performers. So you kind of had to improvise. You knew the rules and you had to go from here to here. So you sort of knew what you had to do in between. So it started out with a lot of improvising. Classical music training, I feel, tends to be very much sort of like this. So it's all about making a beautiful phrase. And when I think about the 90-degree version of that, it's jazz, because jazz goes like this. It's all about understanding the harmony. And more often than not, classical musicians do find it difficult to improvise. It's something that I think is an important skill for students and young people to develop. Helps them understand music much better.
I guess that what I was imagining was some sort of improvisation or revision that would take account of some of the things that Mike was referencing: violence, environmental deterioration, etc. Which sounds very depressing now that I put it that way, but maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say to that? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've got no idea. I might ask colleagues whether anything has been going on, that people have actually been adding bits to performances or adjusting things to reflect some of the things that are going on at the moment. I'm sure there's quite a number of these composers who would welcome that to their own pieces if it's for a strong reason, of which the times now are no stronger than they've ever been.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We are down to the last 5 minutes, and I think it's time for me to turn this back over to Mike.
Okay. Well, Graham, thank you for that. I was just thinking now about a long time ago, the Munich Olympics, and when that slaughter of Jewish people at the Munich Olympics, and they played Beethoven. I remember very quickly an orchestra came and they played Beethoven Funeral. So it's something that's always stuck in my mind, that the music somehow gave a context to it all. I thank you, Graham, for a wonderful afternoon for us, a wonderful hour. I could have wished it to go on for much longer, and to hear you play for so much longer. But I've had the pleasure of hearing that before, of course. So thank you, and thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Joe, and I see Mike Collins has been listening as well. So between us, we coordinate these talks. Our next event in this series is Tuesday, the 28th of February, when Tally Chilson will be discussing Parks and Recreation, London's East End slum in the interwar novels. She's a wonderful speaker who has been reviving those novels between the wars in the 1930s, particularly in relation to those slum areas, but in relation to the fact that the rise of the Nazis, the movement towards war, which is taken on later in the 1960s with the Look Back in Anger movement. So it's going to be a key talk, I think, within our industrial environment and our city environment that she'll be giving next week. And I do hope that you'll join us for that. Not next week; it's the week after next, because next week is, I believe, President's Day, and therefore we're not going to have a session next week. It'll be the week after next. It'll be Tuesday, the 28th of February. If you're listening from the UK, I'm going to give a little bit of an advert, because I've been stunned by something this week. I went to see or last week, I went to see the Royal Shakespeare's Company's current production of The Tempest in Stratford upon Avon. It's directed by Elizabeth Freestone, and it is a must-see if you're in the UK, if you can get tickets, in that it focuses entirely on environmental issues in a brilliant, brilliant way. Absolutely wonderful. It brings out all the kind of issues that we've got about waste, but also about beauty. And it does it with Alex Kingston's feminine, sensitive interpretation of the role of Prospero, a female Prospero. It is fabulous. And the two things merge together in such a beautiful, beautiful way. So if you're in the UK, try and see it. And if you're in the US, try and get the RSC to come to the US with that production. Get it on at the Kennedy Center or somewhere, but see it if you can. Tomorrow, on the 15th of February, there is a Zoom, which you might like to note. It's a free speech project at the Crossroads International Dialogues event in association with the Future of the Humanities Project. Excuse me. And we've got a panel then there who will be discussing democracy in Brazil after the recent problems in relation to the elections. So that's a very interesting, real contemporary issue and problem. It's the first of two of Democracy Entangled. The one after that, in next month, we'll deal with Israel, and then in April we'll be dealing with Iran. So we got that lined up. Excellent speakers for us on all of those. For today, I'd like to thank those at Georgetown University who've made all these events happen, especially our administrators, Julia Mirillo and Mary Gordon. Thanks to Jack DeJoy, the president, at Campion Hall to Nick Austin. Oh, and of course at Georgetown, of course, to Don Banchoff, without whom we couldn't do all of this. Campion Hall to Nick Austin, the master of Campion Hall, to Ying Yang, our Campion Hall administrator. Blackfriars to Richard Finn, the director of the Las Casas Institute, John O'Connor, the regent. My thanks, of course, as ever to Maggie, who helps with all the administration on this. So don't forget to join us for our next free speech session tomorrow, the 15th of February, 11 a.m. EST, 4 p.m. in the UK. Next Tuesday, 28th of February, for the next Bent But Beautiful World event. Not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after that. Tuesday, the 28th of February, for the next Bent But Beautiful World event. In the meantime, enjoy St. Valentine's Day. Let's have a bit of love in the world instead of all this disaster that we've got at the moment. So enjoy the rest of Valentine's Day. I know I'm going to have a lovely meal tonight. So I'm Mike Scott. Please follow me on Twitter at Mike Scott Prof. Thank you and goodbye.